Okay, so what I want to talk to you about today, or what I want to sort of assert today, is how much we can learn from just one poem. And it's been my personal experience, and I've seen it happen with students of mine and other poets, that when I find a particular poem which seems to carry all kinds of information in it about the making of poems, structurally or tonally, or in terms of their sound, or in terms of their use of metaphor, I find that I can read that poem for 6 months or a year, and the lessons that I learn, the lessons that I internalize, just sort of continue to bear fruit. In a certain kind of way, that poem becomes an obsession, and it becomes just a real kind of classroom for me. And I suggest that that's possible to do with the right poem at many different moments in your development and your self-education as a poet. So today I wanted to show you quite a short, apparently modest poem, and that I noticed a few years ago, and sort of show you the number of distinct lessons in poetics and structure that can be extracted from just this one apparently minor poem. The poem is called Poem, unauspiciously enough. It's by an American poet named Robert Kelly, and I'm going to hold it up right now and recite it and read it, and you'll be able to read it. Poem. All this romance is just Zanzibar. What matters is a note stuck by a magnetic carrot to the refrigerator saying, "Don't look for me, I am gone." I'll say it again. All this romance is just Zanzibar. What matters is a note stuck by a magnetic carrot to the refrigerator saying, "Don't look for me, I am gone." Okay, so this is a pretty economical little improvised explosive device from my book, for my admiration. And I just want to itemize at least 4 and possibly 5 distinct lessons that I feel can be learned from that. The first thing you would notice about the poem, if you were studying it, is probably its structure. And you would notice that it contains 2 different kinds of ingredients. It contains a piece of strongly worded rhetoric, 1 or 2 pieces of rhetoric, and that's the first half of the poem. And then the second half of the poem is a very clear, almost imagist kind of image. I mean, when I say imagist, I mean imagist in the sense of the early 20th century school founded by William Carlos Williams and Ezra Pound, that imagist poet. So we have an incredibly kind of lucid, vivid image of the magnetic carrot holding a note against the refrigerator, and the note says something specific, which is a marvelous moment. But then we have the first half, which is the rhetorical moment. The fact that the poem begins rhetorically means that the poem belongs to, of the 3 possible categories, to the category of discursive poem. It's a discursive poem. It's explaining something. And we know that from the first moment where it says, all this romance is just Zanzibar. So there's a wonderful kind of assertiveness and authority that comes into the poem right at the beginning. And then you know what happens in the second half. There's the stem. What matters is, what matters, in other words, in contrast, says Zanzibar. So you have a very powerful kind of pivoting action that is set up in the rhetorical structure of the poem. All right? So, all this romance is just Zanzibar. Now, probably you don't know, as I didn't really know or remember. I remember Zanzibar is a city someplace maybe in Africa, but what country does it belong to? Like Timbuktu, it's kind of hard to remember. And the fact that I even mention or free associate Timbuktu with Zanzibar is you can see they have an associative relationship. They both have strong vowels, they have 3 syllables, and they're really fun to say. So we don't need to know that Zanzibar is an island off the coast of Tanzania, which I looked up before making this podcast. It doesn't matter, because this poem is not using Zanzibar in the semantic sense, that we should have some particular associations with a particular African tropical city. No. What we know about that sentence, and the reason we can understand that sentence, all this romance is just Zanzibar, it comes out of the sonic qualities of the word Zanzibar. And a bunch of 5-year-olds will understand it as well as you do. All this romance is just Zanzibar. And when somebody says Zanzibar, they mean it's just Zanzibar, it's just nonsense, It's just crazy. And so it just throw it away, it's nonsense. We just made up all that stuff about romance. It's just Zanzibar. So it's a fascinating example and a lesson in poetics about the way that sonic elements of a word put together, they automatically acquire a meaning when given a kind of context. In the way that all those made-up words in the Dr. Seuss books that we loved when we were kids, we understood what they meant, even though we didn't have any idea what the words actually meant on a semantic level in the dictionary. We don't need to know that Zanzibar is an African city to know that this opening rhetorical gesture of the writer of the poem is dismissive. All this romance is just Zanzibar. You also see the little sonic rhyme that's going on between the sound of the word romance and the word Zanzibar. Romance, Zanzibar. Romance, Zanzibar. Shaboom, abracadabra, Timbuktu. And so we understand the meaning even though we don't get the reference. Okay, that's a pretty important poetic principle to remember. Is that a lot of times words are working on subliminal levels that we don't even, they're not really even above the waterline for us. The next moment that happens in the poem is a transitional moment. It's a rhetorical pivot. The writer has just made a dismissive noise about all this romance that we spend so much time in our lives, so much emotional energy investing in. That's just nonsense. No, what really matters is, and then we shift into that beautiful image. What matters is a magnetic carrot stuck, a note stuck by a magnetic carrot to the refrigerator saying, "Don't look for me, I am gone." Okay. So the second point I want to make about that is that there is a very sort of wonderfully compressed narrative in there. We see the refrigerator. We see it's probably a pretty humble refrigerator. Maybe it's a Maytag, maybe it's in a double wide trailer someplace in Arkansas. And the note is marvelously specific, and it actually plays into the plot of romance. Don't look for me, I am gone. Okay? And it's stuck there by a magnetic carrot. We'll get to the carrot in a minute. But the marvelous skill that's exhibited in this incredibly economical poem is that from this fragment, don't look for me, I am gone, a note stuck to a refrigerator, we reconstitute an entire narrative. Automatically your imagination is working and it reconstitutes a narrative, and the narrative almost certainly is somebody has left somebody else. Somebody in a relationship has left somebody else, They've taken the car or they've gone to the Greyhound station and they are not going to be coming back, all right? And so we understand that this is a romantic scenario. We constitute that in a second. And it's a pretty big chunk of a narrative. Now, from reader to reader, we may disagree about some minor elements of that narrative. one of us might conclude the woman has left the man. The man is getting home from work. He's taking off his hard hat and putting it on the grimy shelf next to the trailer door, Or you could say that the man has left the woman. I personally favor the woman leaving the man scenario, because the man wouldn't be that considerate just to leave a note. But anyway, so the fact is that from a mere fragment, we see 90% of the narrative is missing. We don't know how old these people are. We don't really know what economic class they are, what race they are. We don't know what color the woman's hair is. We don't know what kind of a relationship it's been for the last 6 months. We know they probably don't have any kids because the first person has been used in the narrative. But there's a lot we don't know. But a remarkable amount has been achieved by omission, by ellipsis. And an enormous amount, but not too much, has been extracted and sort of extracted from the narrative that is suggested by that note attached to the refrigerator. So this is a beautiful narrative skill. All good narrative poems are leaving an enormous amount out. Mediocre narrative poems include so much detail that we're weighed down by it. Halfway through the poem, we feel like we've been walking through mud. We've already gotten, the fact that the carpet is orange shag, and the woman who's left, belongs to an extended family of Jehovah's Witnesses who all own shotguns. No, that would be too much detail. What we have here is a minimalism that's really appropriate to a haiku. Think of the great haiku, Think of the great Isa haiku, I hope I have the name right, where he says, "My neighbor, I wonder how he lives." That's the whole poem. And this, in a way, is a recasting, a reconfiguration of exactly that haiku. How does my neighbor live? My neighbor comes home from work and he finds a note stuck to his refrigerator, at 5 p.m. when he was expecting somebody to be there, and for there to be some Campbell's soup on the stove. That's how my neighbor lives, and he's going to have a bad night tonight. So this answers so many questions through omission, through the skill of minimalism. And in fact, the narrative itself is more radiant. It shimmers and it gives off more energy because in its minimalism, it invites us to participate in the reconstitution, in the understanding and the unfolding of the narrative. It allows us as readers to participate and to bring our own memory and our own cultural knowledge to the poem. Okay, so let's just say the second skill that's been exhibited is omission. And along with omission, we have tonality, because we couldn't really reconstitute the narrative without somehow or other getting a kind of tonality here, which is giving us a lot of information. But that's a subject for another lesson. The third lesson I think that you can extract from looking at this beautiful little economical poem by Robert Kelly is the magnetic carrot. The beautiful magnetic carrot. What matters is a note stuck by a magnetic carrot to the refrigerator saying, "Don't look for me, I am gone." The details are so good. And I just want to make the assertion that in the history of the English language poetry, nobody has ever used a magnetic refrigerator magnet shaped like an orange carrot in a poem before. William Carlos Williams didn't do it, T.S. Eliot didn't do it, and 100,000 other, a million other American poets never did it. This writer who wrote the poem in the 1990s or the year 2000, he got the magnetic refrigerator carrot into the poem. And when we see it, we go, ah, I see that. I've seen it. I've seen, the kumquat magnet and the carrot magnet. And to find it in a poem is to find it inside a little plastic cube, preserved magically, like a time capsule, telling me about American culture, you know, in the 20th century. It's beautiful, it's marvelous, it's humorous, it's comic, it's attached to a dark narrative, but it's funny. It means that our romances indeed are kind of cartoony and like associated with Bugs Bunny. So that image has marvelous information in it. But I think the thing that the value that it carries probably more than anything else is its unbelievable freshness. And it should be inspiring to all of us that all around us constantly are things lying on the surface of the ground and in our apartments and our houses and on the billboards that have never before been put into a poem. And when you put them inside the framework of a poem, you are making them part of eternity, and you are making them part of art. And everybody will say, I wish I had thought of that. I saw that refrigerator magnet of the orange carrot 100 times, and I never fucking put it into my poem. And now this guy beat me to the punch. God damn. So that's the third thing that you could say about the poem. So finally, I guess you could say there's a use of an imported voice here too. So that we've got the voice of the narrator and the person who's rhetorically controlling the poem, and then we've got that beautiful image, and then we've got the note and the voice of another human being who's outside the frame, and she's not coming back, you know, who said, don't look for me, I am gone. Just the interesting kinds of phrasing there, you know, not, you know, dear John, don't look for me, I am gone, not I'm sorry, just don't look for me. This note is the equivalent of a restraining order, you know, and you won't find me in a million years. So we have the flavor of an individual who may not be present, but whose voice is still present in this little apartment. So there are some other things we can learn from this poem too. You know, the really lovely balance between the lines, just their visual appearance on the page, the way the poem is lineated is very effective in its semantic chunk by chunk delivery of information. And there are other things we could talk about too. But this is just an example of how, if you live with a poem and you memorize it and you internalize it, your own poems are going to improve in sort of strength and pungency and vividness and these particular kind of skill sets. These are different skill sets. To isolate them, to identify them, and then to practice them is the same thing as a tennis player working on his backhand, or a golfer, or a pole vaulter, or a piano player playing scales. You cultivate muscle memory, but this is neurocognitive muscle memory. And so that's the reason why we do close reading. And that's the reason why we love and admire the accomplished, fully realized poems of others more than we should value our own amateur productions. That's it.